All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsor, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Sammy and Malka Esterson, for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month in memory of their parents, Yitzchak, Laib ben Aharon HaKohen, Sarah Rachel bas Baruch Avraham, and Hinda bas Henech Efraim. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in memory of Paul's sister, Zachrini Shulamis bas Shmuel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. And the Daf Yomi sponsor, I think I accidentally announced it yesterday, but it's for today, Josh and Malki Rosenblum, in honor of Yehuda's Hanachas Tefillin, Mazel Tov. Let's do with that. Let us begin. We really have an incredibly beautiful and exciting Daf ahead of us today as we enter in to this, our last week of Maseches Rosh Hashana. So we are picking up in Eretz Hashem on the bottom of Chav Tesem Beis. Today's daf is Lamed 30, and we are picking up on the last couple lines left off by the two dots. Amr Rebbe Lazar lo hisne b'Yochanan ben Zakkai ela b'Yavne. Amru lo echad Yavne ve'echad kol makom sheyesh bo bezdin. So remember again, the topic of our Mishnah is the concept of going ahead and blowing the shofar in Rosh Hashana. So remember again, the Mishnah told us that Allah Chalamayse, when Rosh Hashana fell out on Shabbos, in the Mikdash, they would go ahead and blow the shofar outside Abalo b'Medina. By the way, I just want to point out to you, we're not going to delve into it too much, but it is going to become a recurring topic. There is a machlokes, Rashi and the Rambam, about what Medina means. We're just going to go with Rashi right now. Rashi understands that Medina literally means anywhere outside of the Beis HaMikdash, even Yerushalayim. The Rambam and others understand that Medina, right? Medina actually means outside of Yerushalayim. But okay, we're just going to go with Pashup Pshat and Rashi right now. So, and then when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that they shall blow the shofar anywhere where there is a Beis Din. Anywhere where there is a Beis Din. So now there's a little bit of a machlokes. Remember again, now Rabbi Elazar says in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai only instituted it in Yavne. In Yavne. Amrulo, then again, it seems like the Tanakama saying back to Rabbi Elazar, Echad Yavne ve'echad kol makom sheyesh bo beis din. No, Yavne or anywhere else that has a formal Beis Din. So it says the Gemara, Amrulo, Hainu Tanakama. Suppose that the Amrulo is the Tanakama, right? Remember again, the Amrulo is espousing the first version in the Mishnah. In the first version of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said that wherever there's a Beis Din, you could blow shofar in Rosh Hashana. Amru lo, in the Mishnah, they said to him, they sound like the Mishnah is introducing a new opinion. But in fact, it's not a new opinion, it's just the same Tanakama. Oh, here's the difference, here's the nafkamina, Beidina da'akroi. Both say, what happens if you have Beidina da'akroi, pickup Beis Din, right? A pickup Beis Din. So the Gemara, so look at Rashi, Beidina da'akroi, L'tanakamo takinon, V'tana da'amrulo, Savra echad yavne ve'echad kol makom sheyesh bo Beis Din kavua, dumya diyavne. Suppose that the nafkamina would be, did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai institute that Allah Chalamayse, any place that has a Beis Din, any kind of Beis Din, you could blow shofar there? Or does it dafka have to be what we call a Beis Din kavua, a more established type of Beis Din? So ultimately, Rashi explains, the Tanakama would hold, or I should say, our Tanakama would hold, that halacha l'maaseh, any type of Beis Din, you would go ahead and blow on Shabbos. The what we call Amrulo Tanakama holds that ultimately anywhere that has a Beis Din kavua. Okay, good. So let's go weiter. Amrulo echad yavne ve'echad kol makom sheyesh bo Beis Din. Amr Afuna. So both say, now let's qualify this a little bit. So they said to him, whether it's Yavne or any other place that has a Beis Din. Amr Afuna. So both say, now we have a machlokes about what type of Beis Din is necessary in order to allow for blowing the shofar on Shabbos. But moving past that a little bit, the Gemara wants to qualify this a bit more. So Amr Rafuna said, V'im Beis Din. Rafuna said, and by the way, you have to blow it with Beis Din. So the Gemara says, My V'im Beis Din. What exactly does that mean with Beis Din? Bifnei Beis Din. It means, this is very interesting, that you could only blow shofar on Shabbos in the presence of Beis Din. Then I will say, now this is very interesting, because what Rav Huna says is like this. Here's what we have. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, now that the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, any place that has a Beis Din, let's even go with the more machmir approach, that Beis Din means a Beis Din kavua, a real established Beis Din. Rav Huna is coming along and saying, by the way, you could only go ahead and blow your shofar in the presence of the Beis Din. In other words, you have the ability to blow in a community that has a Beis Din is only true if you're blowing in the presence of the Beis Din. La fuke shelo b'fnei Beis Din delo. But let's say let's say I live in Yavne. So remember, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says that halacha l'maisa, we can blow shofar in Yavne in the presence of Beis Din. But when I'm not in the presence of Beis Din, I have no right to blow the shofar. Now I will say, just to understand what's driving this. What's driving this? This goes back to yesterday's daf. What are we concerned about in general when you're going ahead and you're blowing shofar on Shabbos? Right? Gzera derabba, Shema ya'avirenu dalar amos b'shus harabim. Right? It's a carrying concern. So what Rav Huna seems to be saying over here is, if you're going to blow shofar, we want you doing it in the presence, which ultimately means, by extension, under the guidance of Beis Din, under the purview of Beis Din. So the Gemara says, "Massive Rava." So let's listen to this. Rava raises a kasha on this. Va'od zos haisei Yerushalayim misera al Yavne. Now remember again, the last part of the Mishnah, which we'll get to in just a little bit, said Yerushalayim had certain what we'll call benefits over Yavne. How so? That remember again, by Yerushalayim, any place for which you were able to see Yerushalayim, hear Yerushalayim, or was close to Yerushalayim, would go ahead and blow shofar on Shabbos. So the Gemara, blow shofar on Shabbos. Va'ozos, ilema kidiktani zos mibayle, elad Yerushalayim token yechidin, or biyavne ein token yechidin. So we'll say, the Gemara says it must also be telling us something very different, which is, in Yerushalayim, you were permitted to blow shofar as an individual, even not in the presence of Beis Din. Whereas in Yavne or anywhere else that has a Beis Din, the only way to blow shofar is in the actual presence of Beis Din itself. Or biyavne and token yechidin, is that true? That in Yavne you can't blow shofar as an individual? But also listen to how beautiful this is. V'haki as Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef came from Babel to Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael to Babel. Amar kimisayim shlicha de tzibura tekiya biyavne. Listen to this. When the shliach tzibur would finish blowing the tekiyas in Yavne, lo shama inish kol onye mikol tekoi diechidoi. A person cannot hear himself think because of all of the private shofar blasts. So I will say, what it sounds like what's happening in Yavne is you would have the communal blowing of shofar, but then kind of after that, there would be a whole bunch of, Klal Yisrael, breakaway minyanim, right? A whole bunch of breakaway shofars, right? Too fast, too slow, to this, to that, right? So interesting. The point over here is, it seems like you had a lot of private groups or private individuals blowing shofar in Yavne on Shabbos Rosh Hashana, which seems to indicate that halacha l'maisa, shofar can be blown outside of the presence of Beis Din. Ela lav di b'Yerushalayim token bein bizman Beis Din, or bein shelo bizman Beis Din. So Moshe, must be the following distinction. In Yerushalayim, you're allowed to blow the shofar both at the time that the Beis Din is administering Tkiyah shofar and when they're not. Or I should say, the truth is, really, bizman Beis Din really means at the time when Beis Din is sitting in session. Look at Rashi. Bein bizman Beis Din, ad sheish sha'os shahayu Beis Din yoshvin. Beis Din would sit up until midday. So halacha l'maisa in Yerushalayim, you could blow shofar either at the time that Beis Din is in session or not in session. Ubiyavne bizman Beis Din in, shelo bizman Beis Din lo. But in Yavne, you were only permitted to blow the shofar at a time that Beis Din was quote unquote sitting. Miha, but what do you see from here? Miha token afilu shelo b'fnei Beis Din. But you see that even in Yavne, you had the right to blow shofar, even not in the presence of Beis Din. To which the Gemara says, "Lo, the ila b'Yerushalayim token bein b'fnei Beis Din, bein shelo b'fnei Beis Din." In Yerushalayim, you could blow the shofar either in the presence of Beis Din or not in the presence of Beis Din. Or b'Yavne b'fnei Beis Din in, shelo b'fnei Beis Din lo. The Gemara kind of wants to end off over here by saying, first wide line about said Lamed and Aleph. The Gemara wants to say that the fundamental distinction between Yavne and Beis Din and Yerushalayim was that ultimately, again, in Yerushalayim you could blow shofar in the presence of Beis Din, not in the presence of Beis Din. In Yavne, only in the presence of Beis Din. We'll see what the halacha l'maisa is in just a bit. So now remember, how did this whole discussion get started? This whole discussion got started because of a statement of Rav Huna. Rav Huna said, Im Bezdin, that when you blow shofar, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, you're allowed to blow shofar on Shabbos anywhere that has a Bezdin. Okay, what kind of Bezdin? That's a machlokis, but a Bezdin. Rav Huna comes along and says, the Im Bezdin. And when can you blow the shofar? According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, only with Bezdin. So we're trying to figure out what with Bezdin means. What exactly does that mean? So ultimately, again, the way the Gemara is kind of ending off right here is that what Rav Huna meant was Im Bezdin means that you could only go ahead and blow shofar in the presence of Bezdin. But herein lies one of the fundamental distinctions between Yerushalayim and Yavne. In Yerushalayim, when the Beis Hamikdash was standing, you could blow shofar whenever you want. Whenever you want. But now that the Beis Hamikdash is no longer standing, you could blow shofar in a city that has a Bezdin, but only in the presence of that Bezdin. So we'll say others have an alternate version of Rav Huna. So we'll say the pasuk says that the Yom Avavarta shofar trua b'chodesh hashiri be'asar l'chodesh b'yom kippurim ta'aviru shofar b'chol artzam. This is Yovel, right? On Yom Kippur of the Yovel year, you will go ahead and sound the shofar. So here we go. Melamed shekol yochid v'yochid chayiv liskoa. So we'll say we learn from here that every individual is chayiv to sound the shofar. Then this is actually very interesting. Now, according to what the Gemara is suggesting over here, is that halacha l'maisa on the Yom Kippur of Yovel, not only is Beis Din obligated to go ahead and blow the shofar, heralding in the release of slaves and the return of ancestral lands, but every individual has a chiyuv of Tkiyah shofar on Yovel, on Yom Kippur as well, which is quite fascinating. Rav Huna, v'im Beis Din. So here we go again. So right, Shabbos says, so Rav Huna says, oh, and by the way, this obligation to blow shofar on Yovel is what? In the presence of Beis Din. So the Gemara says, "My in Beis." So again, just to understand what the Gemara is doing over here. This, you know this because we've been through Shas already, right? Ika Demasni is we're just taking the same statement of Rav Huna, right? But we're applying it in a different context. You see, in the first version of this discussion, Rav Huna was commenting on the Chiyuv Tkiyah Shofar on Rosh Hashana, and what Rav Huna was saying is, even with the Takana Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that you can blow shofar, now that on Shabbos, in a place where there is a Beis Din, that's only in Beis Din, only in the presence of Beis Din. In this alternate version of Rav Huna's Ve'im Beis Din comment was not about Rosh Hashanah. It was about what? It was about what? Yom Kippur of Yovel, where the Gemara is saying everyone has an obligation to blow the shofar, and Rav Huna is coming along and saying, by the way, Ve'im Beis Din. So the Gemara now says, "My ve'im Beis Din." What does that mean? Bisman Beis Din. Interesting if it means that you could blow shofar, but at the time that Beis Din sits in session. They both say, now what that literally means is the time that Beis Din would sit in session, which, as Rashi said, ad sheish shows, up until 6 hours into the day. Lafuk ishalab bisman Beis Din. And this comes to exclude the fact that you can't blow the shofar at a time that Beis Din would not be in session. So the Gemara says, Masiv Rava. So Rava raises a kasha. Tikiyas Rosh Hashanah v'Yovel. Docha es ha-Shabbos b'gvulin ish ubeso. But Rava raised the kasha and he said that the Tikiyas of Rosh Hashanah and Yovel are Docha Shabbos. Set aside the halachos of Shabbos. B'gvulin. B'gvulin both means in the boundaries, which means outside of Yerushalayim. Ish ubeso. A person and his household. So my ishu beso, what does that mean? Ilema ish ve'ishto, if you want to say that it means a man and his wife, that can't be, because isisa mi mechayva, are women mechuyavos in shofar? This is an incredible thing, because women in general are really moser nefesh to hear Tkiyah shofar, but of course, again, on a technical level, they're pturos. Right, on a technical level, because it's a mitzvahs aseh shazman grama, it's a time-bound commandment. It's such a beautiful thing to see the nature of nashim tzidkanios. It really is like, because you wouldn't know from the way that women relate to the mitzvah of Tkiyah shofar, you would not know that. See, I always think about this. If it was men, You'd be like, phew, oh, Baruch Hashem, this is great, right? Another 15 minutes. Like, women, there's extra minyanim, there's extra this, there's extra that. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I can say every year, there's always someone who you have to arrange like a private tekiah shofar for. So, and often it's for women for whatever the reason. And it's an amazing thing to see that someone could not be chayiv in something, but yet could want something so badly. It's truly beautiful. So the Gemara says as follows. But again, nevertheless, the Gemara is making a halachic statement. So what does it mean? What does it mean when Rava says, or when the Gemara says, Tkiyas shofar, Tkiyas Rosh Hashana, v'yovel dochas hashabes begvulin ish ubeso. My issue base. So if you want to say it's a man and his wife, that can't be, because a woman is technically patura from mitzvahs aseh shazman grami. V'chol mitzvahs aseh shazman grami. The shepituros elalav ish bebeso. Rather, we'll say what it means. The Gemara, so you have to read it like this: Rosh Hashanah v'yovel dochas hashabes. Blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah and Yovel are dochas Shabbos bigvulin outside of Yerushalayim ish. Biveso, a person in his home, which sounds like what it's saying is what? That on Rosh Hashanah, that falls out on Shabbos, halacha l'maaseh, everyone is obligated in shofar, and you could even blow the shofar in your home. Elalav ish biveso, afilu shelo bizman bezdin. And I both say, so again, we'll assume that this is only talking about a place where there is a Beis Din, right? There has to be a Beis Din in your community in order to blow shofar on Shabbos Rosh Hashanah. But it sounds like over here that the obligation to do so will be even at a time when Beis Din is not sitting in session. Or Koshelo Bizman Beis Din. To which the Gemara says, lo. No, not necessarily. The Olam Bizman Beis Din. It's talking about the Zman Beis Din. So the Gemara says, Maser Rav Sheshes, Rav Sheshes raised a kasha, Shava HaYovel Rosh Hashanah, let's Tkiyah L'Brachos. We learned this before. Yovel is like Rosh Hashanah, both for Tkiyah Shofar, as well as for Brachos, for davening. Ella, Shebi Yovel, Tolkien, Bein Bebeis Din Shekitchu Es HaChodesh, Ubein Bebeis Din Shelo Kitchu Es HaChodesh, V'chol Yochid V'Yochiv Chayiv Litkabo. So we see this theme again. But here, so again, Yovel is going to be like Rosh Hashanah for Tkiyah Shofar and for davening. What are the distinctions? That on Yovel, every single Beis Din sounds the shofar. They both say whether this is a Beis Din that is Mekadesh Levan, again, both says because that's our previous sugyas. Not every Beis Din, right? You can't, like I mentioned before, you can't get your buddies who are sitting with you on your Hataras Nadarim Beis Din and say, hey guys, let's go be Mekadesh Lechodesh, right? We're already together. We're out to everybody's Nadarim. Let's go be right. You need a special kind of Beis Din to be able to do that. So ultimately, but when it comes to Tkiyah Shofar by Yovel, every Beis Din sounds that shofar. Whether it's the type of Beis Din that could be Mekadesh Lechodesh or not, Ubein Beis Din Shelo Kitchu Es HaChodesh, V'chol Yochid V'Yochiv Chayiv Liskoa. Not only that, but as we just said before, every individual is chayiv to sound the shofar on Yovel. However, Uber Rosh Hashanah, but here's the part we're focusing on Rosh Hashanah, Lo Hayutokim Ella Bebeis Din Shekitchu Es HaChodesh. On Rosh Hashanah, Bosai, you could only blow the shofar in front of a Beis Din which had the capacity to declare the new month, which I will say means a much more substantive Sanhedrin. If you look at Rashi the Rosh Hashanah lo hayutokim kishachalios b'Shabbos elo bebeis din hagadol shel Sanhedrin hagedola hamekadshin es hachadoshim. So we'll say this is much more restrictive. So remember again, this would literally say the only time you could blow the shofar in Rosh Hashanah is in front of a Sanhedrin, a high court, not just any court. Ve'ein kol yochid v'yochiv chayav liskoa. And on Rosh Hashanah, every individual is not obligated to sound the shofar. So whereas on Yovel, every individual is chayav to sound the shofar. On Rosh Hashanah, it's not necessarily the case. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ein kol yochid v'yochiv chayav liskoa." What does it mean when we say that every individual is not obligated to blow the shofar? Ilema dibi Yovel token yechidin, or Rosh Hashanah in token yechidin. So maybe you'll say that it's on Yovel, individuals blow the shofar, but on Rosh Hashanah they do not. V'haki as Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef. We'll reference back what we said before. When Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef came to Bavel, he told us, Amri, ki have a Messiah shlicha de tzibura tikiyasa biyavne. When the Shliach Tzibur finished blowing the shofar in Yavne, lo shama inish kol unye mikol tikue. People were literally not able to hear themselves think because of all the private shofar blasts, which shows you that in Yavne, individuals were blowing their shofros. Elalav the ilu biyovel token bein bisman bezin bein shelo bisman bezin. Rather, it must mean as follows: that on Yovel, so they blew the shofar, whether again it was the time that Bezin was in session or a time that Bezin wasn't in session. Uber Rosh Hashanah, bisman bezdin in, shelo bisman bezdin lo. But on Rosh Hashanah, it must be that shofar, although it could be sounded individually, but it had to be sounded at the time that Bezin was in session. Katani mihas, what do you see from here? Biyovel bein bisman bezdin, bein shelo bisman bezdin. You see at least by Yovel, so we've established also by Yovel that individuals have an obligation to blow the shofar. You do so whether it's a time that Bezdin is sitting in session or not. To which the Gemara says, lo, li'olam bisman Bezdin. In reality, we're talking about when Bezdin is sitting in session, even by Yovel. V'hachi katani. This is what it means to say, bisman Bezdin, biyovel, in Yovel, bisman Bezdin, token bein bifnei Bezdin, bein shelo bifnei Bezdin. So most of the Gemara wants to suggest the following conclusion. When it comes to Yovel, you could only blow the shofar at the time when Bezdin is sitting in session. However, you have the right to blow the shofar wherever you are, whether you're in the presence of Bezdin or not in the presence of Bezdin. But Rosh Hashanah, token bisman Bezdin ubifnei Bezdin. But on Rosh Hashanah, you're limited in two ways. Number one, you can only blow the shofar at the time when Bezdin is in session. And number two, only in the presence of Bezdin itself. Itmar nami, the Gemara supports this idea. Amar Rav Chia bar Gamda, Amar Rav Yossi ben Shol, Amar Rebbe, ein token ella bisman, ella kolzman shebezdin yoshvin. On Rosh Hashanah, you could only go ahead and blow shofar at a time when Bezdin is in session, and based on what the Gemara just said before, and only in the presence of Bezdin itself. So by Rabbi Zera, so we'll say one more piece, and then we'll see the Rambam. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. So it sounds like the conclusion that the Gemara ended off with over here is as follows. On Yovel, you could only blow at the time that Bezdin is in session, but you could blow shofar in the presence of Bezdin, not in the presence of Bezdin. On Rosh Hashanah, also you could only blow at the time when Bezdin is in session, but you could either blow in the presence of Bezdin or not. I'm sorry, I just said that wrong. In Yovel, you could only blow at the time that Bezdin is in session, but you could blow in the presence or not in the presence. On Rosh Hashanah, you also have to blow when Bezdin is in session, but only in the presence of Bezdin. To which the Gemara just asks a follow-up question that will go to the Rambam. By Rabbi Zera, Ninaru la'amod v'lo amdu mau. So we'll say, remember again, what we've established, so it sounds like so far, both for Rosh Hashanah as well as for Yovel, you can only blow the shofar when I both say when? When? Bezdin is in session. When is Bezdin in session? First 6 hours of the day. Okay, that's the first. Just going fast. First 6 hours of the day. So let's listen to the interesting shaila. So it says Rabbi Zera, Nin aru la'amod below amdu. What happens if the dayanim, Nin aru literally means they moved in their seat about to get up, but they did not yet get up. Is that called the end of the Bezdin session or not? So the Gemara says, Mau, Bezdin yoshvin ba'inan v'ha'ika. Do we say that Bezdin is sitting? Bezdin is sitting, right? All you need is Bezdin to be sitting, and they're still sitting. O Dilma zman Bezdin ba'inan v'leka. Or do you require Bezdin in session? And I will say, see, the Gemara is saying something amazing. I will say, the moment you begin to get up, you're done, right? You're done, right? You're no longer listening. You're no longer involved. You know this, right? This is what happens. It's the same way when you're having a conversation with someone. Let's say if you're having a conversation with someone, when do you know when to stop talking? When the person starts going like, right? When they want to say something, because the moment that the person you're talking to begins to show they want to talk means they're no longer listening, right? The moment I'm moving around, we're done here. We're done. This happens every morning, by the way, right? The moment 5:44 comes, right? It doesn't. Moshe Rabbeinu could be bringing down the luchos, right? It doesn't. Right? The moment you move, we're done. So we'll say, isn't it a profound shaila? The Gemara is asking over here, until what point in time is Bezdin actually in session? Do we say as long as they're seated? As long as they're seated, that's called ultimately Yoshvin, we're good. Or do we say, no, they're only in session when they're engaged? But the moment that they're disengaged, even if they're physically seated, the Beis Din is no longer considered to be Yoshvin, to which the Gemara says, Teku. To which the Gemara leaves it. The Gemara does not answer that particular question. So I will say, let me show you the Rambam on this, because the Rambam here happens to really be quite fascinating. This is the Rambam, Hilchos Shofar. The Rambam puts Hilchos Shofar, Sukkah, Lulav, everything in one bucket. This is Parak Beis, Halachas Ches and Tes. Let me just read this to you quickly. We left enough time for this. So Kishagazru Shlolis Ka b'Shabbos. So we'll say again, Parak Beis, Halachas Ches and Tes. Kishagazru Shlolis Ka b'Shabbos, L'Gazru El Makom She'en Bo Beis Din. So we'll say, remember again. So the Rambam adopts what the Mishnah said, which is they used to blow the shofar in the Beis Hamikdash, which of course makes sense because as we established, blowing shofar is only in Isser D'Rabbanan, what we call a Shvus, and Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. Rabbinic law does not apply inside of the Beis Hamikdash. Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. You can't blow shofar on Shabbos. Gzeira D'Rabbah. The Gzeira, the decree of Rabbah, lest you come to carry the shofar in a public domain. Daladamis. So now the Rambam says, Kishagazru Shalosh Ka b'Shabbos, when Chazal said you can't blow the shofar on Shabbos, Lo Gazru Ela B'Makom She'en Bo Beis Din. They only established this gezerah in a place that doesn't have a Beis Din. Aval bizman shaya mikdash kayim v'haya Beis Din agad b'Yerushalayim hayu akol token b'Yerushalayim b'Shabbos kol zman she Beis Din Yoshavos. Remember, I told you about this. I told you it's going to be machlokes, right? Remember again, according to Rashi, when the Beis Hamikdash stood, they were only blowing the shofar where? Inside of the mikdash, not in Yerushalayim. According to the Rambam, they were blowing it in Yerushalayim as well. Now, the Rambam adds in over here, but they would only blow the shofar when? Kol zman shebeis din yoshvin. Kol zman shebeis din yoshvin. So the Rambam paskins that halacha l'maisa, you can only blow shofar at a time that Beis Din was in session. Now I'm skipping to Sif Tes for just a moment because the next part of Sif Ches is our next Gemara. Ubizman hazeh, shecharav hamikdash. And now in the times that we live, that there's no Beis Hamikdash. Kamakum sheyesh bo Beis Din kavua, v'hu sheyeh samuch be'eretz Yisrael token bo b'Shabbos. So I will say, and now the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. Any city, any place that has a Beis Din kavua, right? Beis Din means a set Beis Din, where the dayanim have smicha. Dayanim have smicha, right? So also remember again, smicha, we translate it as ordination, is the unbroken chain of ordination. We'll call it from Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So only a Beis Din, only a city that has a Beis Din kavod, an established Beis Din, whose dayanim have true smicha. We don't have true smicha today, right? You have a zeichel smicha, but not a true smicha. So dayanim have smicha from Moshe, right? From the chain of Moshe Rabbeinu, token b'Shabbos. Here we go. They token b'Shabbos ela bebeis din shekidru as hachodesh. Avashar batei dinin ain't token bahen afa pishein smuchin. Furthermore, says the Rambam, the only what kind of Beis Din counts for this? Only the type of Beis Din which could be mekadesh the chodesh. So we'll say which type of Beis Din could be mekadesh the chodesh. So the truth is, it's either a 71 or 23 member Beis Din. So you see already, you need a pretty high caliber Beis Din in order to blow shofar on Shabbos. Ve'in token ella, here we go. Bifnei Beis Din gadol bilvad kolzman shen yoshvin. So we'll say, Salach l'maisa, the Rambam says, you need both criteria. Number one, both say, this is halacha l'maisa. Both say, I'm going to give you the entire daf, lamed, amud, aleph in one line, right? We had all this back and forth. Here's the halacha l'maisa. What, right? So number one, it only works, you could blow shofar on Shabbos in a city that has a real Beis Din. Real Beis Din as defined as the type of Beis Din which can be mekadesh the chodesh. It's either 23 judges or 71 judges. That's number one. Number two, they have to have true smicha. Number three, you could only blow shofar in the presence of Beis Din. You could only blow shofar in the presence of Beis Din, and not only that, kolzman shein yoshvin, and only when they're in session. So we paskin halacha l'maisa, both bifnei Beis Din could only blow in the presence of Beis Din, and only when they are sitting in session. So the Rambam says over ninaru la'amod v'lo amdu tokim bifneim. The Rambam actually paskins that halacha l'maisa, if the dayanim stirred in their seats ready to get up but didn't actually get up, you could still blow shofar. Chutz leBeis Din Ein token. But outside of Beis Din, you cannot blow the shofar. V'lama token mifnei Beis Din. The Rambam says, why can you blow the shofar in front of the Beis Din? Mipnei she Beis Din's reason hein. V'lo yavo token lahavir shofar b'fnei b'shram. I mean, the Rambam then goes on to say, why are we limiting you to blowing the shofar in the presence of Beis Din? And while Beis Din is in session, why? Because this way Beis Din is vigilant. They'll make sure that no one ends up illegally carrying the shofar. So we'll say, that's how he paskin. You could blow the shofar in any, since the Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed, you could blow the shofar in any city that has a Beis Din kavua, type of Beis Din that is capable of being Mekadesh the Chodesh. Rabbanim have true smicha, bifnei Beis Din, and bisman she Beis Din yoshvin. Those are all the criteria. Absolutely incredible. By the way, so you're asking, I know, what's your kasha? What's your kasha? So okay, so that's a good kasha, but we know because we don't have Batei Din like this. You don't have Batei Din. What's your other kasha? What do you do about the story in Yavne? And I will say again, we have eidos from Yavne that people were blowing the shofar privately, right? You have eidos in that. It's not a kasha. Why isn't it a kasha? Because you see, like Yavne was a shtickle Wild West when it came to Tikei Shofar. We saw in yesterday's daf. It took a little while for the system to shake out. See, I will say sometimes when you hear these stories in Gemara, it's before that the halacha was decided. So before halacha was actually concretized and solidified, you had different types of practices happening, right? It's the same way, by the way, that for a very long time, Beis Shammai on Hanukkah began on the first night with 8 candles and then went down to 1 candle. And Beis Hillel started at 1 candle and went up ultimately again to multiple other candles. So you see, again, before halacha is solidified and concretized, you have different practices. So yes, it appears, it happened. It's eidos in Yavne. There was some period of time where individuals were blowing shofar, but halacha l'maisa, at a certain point in time, the halacha becomes solidified. And again, as the Rambam wrote, we only do it bifnei Beis Din, in front of a Beis Din that's capable of Mekadesh Chodesh, with smicha, bisman Beis Din, lifnei Beis Din and bisman she Beis Din yoshin. Beautiful. But let's finish the sugya. So we'll say the Gemara says, however, Yerushalayim had certain qualities over Yavne. And the Gemara says, what do you see from here? So remember again, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that pretty much any city, shiroa shoma'as krova v'yechola lavo. Any city from which you could see Yerushalayim, any city from which you could hear the tekios in Yerushalayim, and any city which was close to Yerushalayim was permitted to go ahead and blow shofar on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, roa. What does it mean that you could see Yerushalayim from another city as opposed to a city that was in a valley? Because we'll say you could have a city, let's say city A is in a valley, so it's geographically close to Yerushalayim, but it can't see Yerushalayim. Shoma'as, ultimately again it could hear the Tkiyas from Yerushalayim, Prat Liosheves Bahar, Broshahar. You could have a city again that is close geographically, but if it's sitting on a mountain, you can't necessarily hear what's happening inside of Yerushalayim. Krova, it's close. Prat liosheves chutz letchum. To exclude a city that may be able to hear, may be able to see, but is outside of the tchum. V'yechola lavo, and it's able to come to Yerushalayim. Prat lemafsik la naro. This comes to exclude a city, ultimately again, which a river divides from Yerushalayim, and therefore Yerushalayim is not accessible. So both say this is incredible. So therefore, even Bisman HaMikdash, any city that was either close, was able to hear, was able to see Yerushalayim, was able to blow shofar on Shabbos. Well, Shabbos tells you something amazing. It is the power and the holiness of the city of Yerushalayim that it impacts not only the residents inside of the city, but Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, has a hashba, has an influence on everything around it. If you could see Yerushalayim, you're impacted. If you could access Yerushalayim, you're impacted. If you're close to Yerushalayim, you're impacted. If you could hear Yerushalayim, you're impacted. I will say absolutely incredible. I'll just end off this sugya. Rabbi Yitzchak of Berdichev has a beautiful, beautiful insight into this Gemara. Remember, again, I will say this whole sugya, before I move on to the next sugya, this whole sugya was Yom Tov Shal Rosh Hashana Shechalios B'Shabbos. Right, that was the whole discussion over here. If Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, when can you go ahead and blow the shofar? When not? So also listen to what the Rebbe says. Kedushas Levi says, in Rosh Hashanah, Chalios B'Shabbos, so the Rebbe reads the Gemara a little bit differently. You know, I always say, the beauty of Chasidus is you could put punctuation wherever you want. Right, so also listen to this. So the Rebbe reads it, Yom Tov Shal Rosh Hashanah, he says, Well, he reads it like this. Im Rosh Hashanah Chalios b'Shabbos. So the phrase is Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah Chalios b'Shabbos. The Rebbe says the way to understand it is Im Rosh Hashanah Chalios b'Shabbos. If Rosh Hashanah falls out on a Shabbos, Harei Bishvilenu Ze Yom Tov. It is the greatest Yom Tov when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos. Now, I will say we normally think the opposite way because we don't get to blow the shofar. So the Rebbe says, why is it the greatest Yom Tov if ultimately Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos? Listen to this. I will say this is incredible. Ki aliva de emes ein kosim b'Rosh Hashanah b'gimel sarayim avtachim halo aser lichtov b'Shabbos. Because I will say we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu keeps the Torah as well. So just like we're not allowed to write on Shabbos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not allowed to write either. So when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, there are 3 Sfarim, there are 3 books that are open. There's the Sifrei Chaim, Sifrei Mesim, the book of life, the book of death, the book of Beinonim. So ultimately, again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has these books open. It's Shabbos Kodesh. One of the malachas is Ksiva. But the Rebbe says something amazing. The only way you're allowed to write on Shabbos is why Pikuach Nefesh is to save a life. So says the Rebbe, when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, the only book that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the right to write in is the Sefer HaChaim. To inscribe us in life, for life, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could write in. But the other books, there's no heter to write in on Shabbos. He says, Ela im kosim osanu b'Sefer HaChaim, harei ze pikuach nefesh, shedoches HaShabbos, umuter lichtov, v'lachein ki shechal b'Shabbos, harei ze Yom Tov. Therefore, the Rebbe says when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, it's the greatest Yom Tov in the world. Because even then, the only time the Ribono Shel Olam has the license to write is to inscribe us in the Sefer HaChaim. Incredible, incredible. I will say, with that, let us go weiter. Says the Mishnah, I will say, and more incredible sugis here. So I will say, so we're continuing on the Takanas Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. In the beginning, lulav was taken for all 7 days in the mikdash. Haya lulav nita b'mikdash sheva b'medina yom echad. So we'll say, so once again we have our definitions. Rashi is going to say, b'medina ultimately means outside of the Beis HaMikdash, right? So even in Yerushalayim, it was only taken for 1 day. Now Rashi says over here, first Rashi in the Mishnah, B'rishon ha'yululav nita b'mikdash sheva, t'chsev usmachtem l'pnei Hashem Elokeichem shivas yomim. So we'll say, interestingly enough, by Sukkot, we seem to have these different psukim. One pasuk says you shall rejoice 7 days. One pasuk says you should just take it for you on the first day. The way we reconcile it is as follows. Lulav was taken for 7 days in the Beis HaMikdash and only 1 day outside of the Beis HaMikdash. However, Mishachar of Beis HaMikdash, when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, his can Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai shei lulav nitol b'medina shiva zech lemikdash. Rabbi Yochanan instituted that we should take lulav outside of the Beis HaMikdash for 7 days. For 7 days, zecher lemikdash, to remember the practice of the Beis HaMikdash. Furthermore, he instituted v'sheyehei yom hanef kula aser, that the entire day, we'll say Yom HaNeif means the day of the waving. It refers to the day that they would bring the Omer. When was the Omer brought? The 16th of Nisan, second day of Pesach, the Omer was brought. Shabbos Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that you can't eat chadash, you can't eat of the new grain for the entire day. The 16th, we'll get into that in just a moment. Shabbos, the Gemara asks a fundamentally, you saw this, the question. Uminolan da'avdinan zecher lemikdash. See, Shabbos, what the Mishnah says over here is that when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan instituted that we should take lulav 7 days outside of the Beis HaMikdash, zecher lemikdash, to remember what was done in the Beis HaMikdash. To which the Gemara says, how do you know that we're supposed to institute practices to remember that which was done in the Beis HaMikdash? To which the Gemara says, Da'amar Kra, Ki la rukalach, u'imakosech pa'ech ne'um Hashem. Literally translated, I will go ahead and provide a cure for you, and I will heal you from your wounds, ne'um Hashem, ki nidacha karaolach, because they call you cast away, tzion hi, Doresh ein law. No one seeks out Sion. No one seeks out Sion. So also, the Navi Yirmiyahu over here is painting the picture of desolation and destruction. And the way he describes Yerushalayim, the Beis HaMikdash, right? Sion is Doresh ein law. No one seeks her out. Michlal debaya drisha. We learn from here that you are supposed to seek out Sion. So we'll say we learn from here that halacha l'maisa, one is supposed to actively remember Yerushalayim. See, the problem with things that are destroyed is that often they are forgotten. So the Navi tells Klal Yisrael, no one's seeking out Tzio, no one's remembering Yerushalayim. And from that we glean, we understand, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai understood that halacha l'maisa, even when it's destroyed, dafka when it's destroyed, you're supposed to remember, you're supposed to seek it out. And this becomes the basis for Rabbi Yochanan's takanos of Zecher LeMikdash, to remember the Beis HaMikdash. V'shehei kula yom hanef kula asar. Both say if we have time, we'll come back to that in just a moment about Zecher LeMikdash versus Zecher LeChurban. We'll come back to that. V'shehei yom hanef kula asar. Furthermore, again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, both say, so very quickly, we know the halacha is as follows. On the second day of Pesach, you bring the carbon omer. What was the significance of the omer? It allowed for the consumption of chadash. Chadash represents, so let's just to illustrate this. Right? Let's say it's going to be Pesach 5782. Okay? So we'll say any grain which was planted since last year Pesach 5781, is usher, cannot be consumed until the Karban HaOmer on Pesach 5782 is offered. That's called the halacha of chadash. You can't eat chadash. Once you go ahead and you offer up the Karban HaOmer, which was a barley offering, the chadash becomes yashan, and then you're allowed to go ahead and eat it. So I will say, what happens in the absence of the Beis HaMikdash when there is no Karban Omer? There is no Karban Omer. So the Mishnah said, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, you have to essentially wait until the 17th. You have to, so normally, again, the Karban Omer is brought on the second day of Pesach, which is the 16th of Nisan. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted, you can't eat any chadash, you can't eat any grain or any new grain. On the 16th, you have to wait until the 17th. And then anything that was chadash becomes yashan on the 17th. Says the Rabbi said, listen to this Gemara, my taima. So it says the Gemara, Mehira yibane Beis HaMikdash. Because speedily in our days, the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt. But you just have to understand this. These words have been read on this page, right, for over 1,000 years. For 1,000 years, right? And the Yid gets to Rosh Hashana Daf Lamed Amad Aleph. We read the same words, Mehira Yibana HaMikdash. And they're always true. They're always true. Mehira Yibana. It's been a long time. But just because something's been a long time doesn't mean it's not going to happen speedily in our days. Mehira Yibana HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt. The Yomra people will say, Ishtakid Milo Achanu Bahayar Mizrach, Achshav Nami Nechol. So we'll say, here's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was concerned about. Technically speaking, when there is no Karban Omer, so Chadash, the new grain, becomes immediately permitted at dawn, or we'll call it sunrise, of day 16, right, of the second day Pesach. So as Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai concerned about, Beis HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt, and now we have a Karban Omer, but people will nevertheless inadvertently end up eating Chadash on the beginning of day 16. Why? Because what are they going to say? Last year, we ate Chadash in the morning of the 16th of Nisan. So therefore, again, Achshav Nami Nechol, we should be able to do it now. And they won't realize, V'lo Yadi, Di Ishtaki Lo Hava Omer, Heir Mizrach Hitir. They won't realize that, last year, there was no Beis HaMikdash. And in the absence of the Beis HaMikdash, dawn allows for the consumption of Chadash, or dawn transforms Chadash into Yashan. Hashta di'ika Omer matir. But now that there's a Beis HaMikdash, we have a Karban Omer, and only once you bring the Omer is the Chadash permitted. So the Gemara says, okay, let's talk about it. Therefore, we'll say, how does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai take care of this problem? How does he take care of the problem? Entire day 16 is Aser. Right? You can't eat any Chadash on day 16. You effectively have to wait until day 17. What that does, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, is the year in which the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt, you will avoid confusion. To which the Gemara says, well, let's talk about this just a little bit, because the truth is the confusion would only come if the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt like right at the same time of the Karban HaOmer, right? Because let's say the Beis HaMikdash is built, Halavaya, Dalit Kislev, right? Emir Hashem, B'Shatov Mitzlachos. So by the time we get to Pesach, everybody's going to be in the groove already. It's not going to be a problem. He must be talking about a case of the Beis HaMikdash that's being rebuilt right around the time of the Karban Omer, where there'd be confusion. So the Gemara says, the Mivni Amos. So when is this? When is it? What Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? When is the Beis HaMikdash being rebuilt that you have this concern? If you want to say it's rebuilt on the 16th, let's say it's actually rebuilt on the second day of Yom Tiv, right? First day of Chalamai, the 16th of Nisan. Hare Heir Mizrach Hitir. But say if that's the case, that the Beis Hamikdash is being rebuilt on the 16th, the moment the dawn of the 16th comes and there's no Beis Hamikdash, dawn allows for the consumption of Chadash. Right? So if there's no Beis Hamikdash on the dawn of the 16th, Chadash becomes permitted. Ella, the Ivni Bechameser Mechatzos, I'm sorry, the Ivni Bechameser. Rather, it must be that when is the Beis Hamikdash being rebuilt? When? On the 15th. Now, both say, the 15th is what? The 15th is what? First day Pesach. Take a look at the last two lines of Rashi. Last middle Rashi. Rashi says, what are you talking about? Vim Tomar, Haichi Mishkachas de Ivni Bechamesar. How can you talk about a Beis Hamikdash being rebuilt on the 15th? That's Yom Tiv. That's Yom Tiv. The Ivni Balai V'Hakamla Mesech Shvuas. De'ein binyan Beis Hamikdash lo b'Yom Tiv v'lo b'layla. We don't build the Beis Hamikdash neither at night, nor during the day, nor on Yom Tiv. So well, get ready for this. Look at Rashi. Hani mili binyan b'dei Adam, aval binyan ha'asid lavo b'dei Shamayim. Says Rashi, you can't build the Beis Hamikdash when you're building it by human hand. But the third Beis Hamikdash, says Rashi, is coming down fully built by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Ribbon Shalom could choose to deliver the prefab Beis Hamikdash, right? He could deliver it, he'll put it on the divine flatbed truck, right? And he'll just deliver it right to Harabayis, even on Yom Tov itself. I'll say, isn't that, incredible, no? Incredible. Ari, I think you have to start something like the Starbucks triple shot, something like this. Chevra, that's what you're just reading over here. What you're just reading over here. Rashi HaKodesh just told us, Rosh Hashana Daf Lamed, come on, right? If you don't feel it, we're not going to get it, right? If you don't get excited about things like this, why should HaKodesh Baruch Hu give it to us? Rashi's saying, the third Beis Hamikdash, isn't that awesome? The third Beis Hamikdash is going to come down fully built by the Ribbono Shel Olam, and therefore it could come down even on Yom Tov itself, even at night itself. And Rabbi and both say, just to understand, you see, sometimes you hear this, that's a nice story. It's not a story. It's not a story. It's emes la'amito. It's true. V'haraya the Gemara, which is the basis of halachas, operating on these truths. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, so when are we worried about the Beis Hamikdash is going to be rebuilt? So maybe it's the 15th. So Gemara says, if that's the case, mechatzosa yom al lishtari. You don't have to say that Chadash is usher the entire 16th, rather just up until midday. Why? Dahatnan haruchoki mutar mechatzosa yom la'alon lefi shem bezin mitzas limbo. But when the Beis Hamikdash stood, it was known that the Karban HaOmer was offered up by midday. Right? It never went past midday because Bezin was very zariz, very alacritous. Now, what are we concerned about? Maybe it's going to be built on the 15th, but right before Shkia. Inami, the Ivni Balayla, or it's being built at night. And therefore the concern is if it's built too close to the time, even if it comes out like Rashi says, fully built, there's going to be a little bit of like a bahala, right? A little bit of not a confusion, but a commotion. Remember, again, also, you have to go and still cut down the barley, right? You have to cut down the barley. So the Gemara's, so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is concerned. Well, see, listen to what he's concerned about. He's concerned, in a good way, that the Beis Hamikdash is going to be rebuilt in very close proximity to the time that the Omer was going to be offered. And that's going to cause confusion. So in order to avoid confusion, just say, the entire day of the 16th, you can't eat Chadash. That way, again, if there's any level of confusion, no one's going to inadvertently end up eating Chadash, at least in year number one. So the Gemara says, Amrav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rabbi Yochanan b'shitas amadays. B'shitas Rabbi Yehuda Amrav. The truth is, Rabbi Yochanan ultimately, again, aligns himself with the view of Rabbi Yehuda. And I both say, Rabbi Yehuda holds the Amar, ad etzem hayom hazeh, ad itzumo shel yom, v'kasaver ad va'ad bichlal. Both sides. Interestingly enough, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai actually holds like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that mid oraisa, the entire day of the 16th, ultimately again is asr min HaTorah. That in the absence of a karban ha'omer, right, which allows you to eat chadash on the 16th, right after it's offered, Rabbi Yehuda holds that Allah, in the absence of the karban ha'omer, the entire day 16 is aser midoraisa. That, and the Gemara is suggesting Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai holds like Rabbi Yehuda. So essentially what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying is a very simple halacha. Once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, we revert back to the basic biblical law, which is Chadash is aser the entire day of the 16th. To which the Gemara says, Umi Savarle Kavase, does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai actually go to Rabbi Yehuda? V'hamaflik Poligala, he argues on him. Disnan. Mishachara Beis HaMikdash Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Shehei Yomanav Kula Aser. Right? When the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that the entire day of the 16th should be aser. You can't eat Chadash on the 16th. Rabbi Yehuda says, why do you have to legislate that? Ultimately, again, Rabbi Yehuda says that's the halacha, right? When the pasuk says ad etzem hayom hazeh, you can't eat the chadash ad etzem hayom hazeh ad itzmush for the entirety of the day. So Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, why do you have to make new legislation? That's the halacha. In the absence of the karban ha'omer, you can't eat chadash the entire day of the 16th. To which the Gemara says, you're right. The Gemara says, Hasam, Rabbi Yehuda the Katai. Rabbi Yehuda is making a mistake. Ihu sav Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai midrabanan ka'amar, v'lohi midaraisa ka'amar. Rabbi Yehuda was making a mistake. You see, Rabbi Yehuda thought that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was instituting this midrabanan. But in fact, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai holds this to be true, midaraisa. I v'ha hiskin katani. But it says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted it. Both say takana sounds like what? Takana sounds like what? Dirabanan. So my hiskin, darash v'hiskin. Hiskin abosai means he darshan the pasuk like Rabbi Yehuda and reinstituted the previous practice. Say Rabosai, what comes out over here is as follows. If you notice, by the way, the Gemara doesn't really spend all that much time speaking about lulav. What I will just point out is, remember, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right, says that he instituted in the aftermath of the destruction of Beis HaMikdash that you should take lulav for 7 days. Does it really mean 7 days? Does it really mean 7 days? No, it's never more than 6 days. Because remember, again, you're never taking lulav on Shabbos. This goes back to Gzeira D'Rabba. Same reason we're not playing shofar on Shabbos, not reading Megillah on Shabbos. We're also not taking lulav and esrog on Shabbos. But it means is conceptually, he instituted 7 days. That's number one. Number two, we learn about say that how do you know that you are supposed to institute practices zecher l'churban, to remember, or I should say zecher l'mikdash, to remember the practices of the Beis HaMikdash, ultimately comes from the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, Sion hi doresh ein la. No one's seeking out Sion, which tells us we have an obligation to seek out Sion. How do we seek out Sion? By engaging in practices zecher l'mikdash, to remember that which was done in the Beis HaMikdash. And finally, piece of legislation number 3, halacha l'mais Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, when there's a Beis HaMikdash and there's a karban ha'omer, the bringing of the omer allows for the consumption of chadash, grain planted since last Pesach, and usually we see Beis usually got that done latest by chatzos, latest by midday. When there is no Beis HaMikdash and therefore no karban ha'omer, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says it turns out halacha l'maisa, we revert back to the biblical paradigm, which is in the absence of the karban, the entire day of the 16th is aser. And it turns out that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was not instituting a piece of rabbinic legislation, but rather, again, he actually holds like Rabbi Yehuda, halacha l'maisa, that in the absence of the karban ha'omer, the entire day number 16 is aser for chadash consumption. You can't eat chadash until day number 17. Happens to be the piece of Mehera Yibana HaMikdash is a very, very beautiful piece and a beautiful Havamina that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was instituting this because if the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt very quickly, it might cause some concern, which is true also. But it turns out that really he holds like Rabbi Yehuda that mid'oraisa, in the absence of the karban ha'omer, day 16 is aser for chadash consumption. Beautiful. So it used to be able to say, so now it's actually going back to Kiddush Chodesh a little bit. It used to be that Beis would accept witnesses to testify about the new moon the entire day. Pam achas nishtau ha'edim milavo v'niskalkalu halaviyim b'shir. One time the witnesses came late. And the Levium got mixed up with the Shira. Rabbi said, let's give a little bit of context over here. Rashi understands that the story being referenced over here is talking about Rosh Hashana. Right? So what happened? What happened? Bezin was waiting for witnesses to come. It's the 29th day of Elul. Remember, again, I will say more often than not, as we've seen since the times of Ezra, Elul was always a 29-day month. So remember, again, it's day 30. They're waiting for the Eidim to come, and Eidim aren't showing up. They're not showing up. The Leviim have to offer up the Tamid Shal Bein Arbaim, the afternoon Tamid offering. So they're waiting for the witnesses. They weren't sure. Now remember, with the Tamid was Levitic song, Shira. Now Shira depends, is it a weekday, is it a Yom Tiv? The Leviim weren't sure what to do, so what ended up happening? They ended up offering the afternoon Tamid, and they accompanied it with weekday Shira. Weekday Shira. Then what happened? Right when they finished, who showed up? Who showed up? Witnesses. So it turned out that day was really Rosh Hashanah, and the Leviim said the wrong Shira with the Tamid Shal Bein Ha'arbaim, with the afternoon Tamid. As a result of that, they instituted Iskinu Shaloyu Mekablin Ella Adam Mincha. They instituted that halacha lamaisa, we will not go and accept Eidim only until Mincha time. Now, I want to point out, Rashi says, interestingly enough, on day 30, in the morning, they always said weekday Shira. They always said weekday Shira, right? Even though the witnesses may come that day, because remember, witnesses never came by the morning. They always came sometime later. So the morning, they always said weekday Shira. But the hope was that by the afternoon already, they would know if it was Rosh Chodesh, or in this case, Rosh Hashanah, they would say the right Shira. So therefore, again, I will say, it was really Rosh Hashanah that kind of messed things up. That didn't sound right. It was this episode on Rosh Hashanah where the witnesses came after the Leviim sang the weekday Shira for the afternoon Mincha, and that led to an important piece of legislation. We only accept witnesses up until Mincha time. Up until Mincha time. After Mincha time, we do not accept witnesses. So the Gemara says, so v'imbo eidim min amincha lamala noagin osa yom kodesh ulamachar kodesh. And I will say, what happens if witnesses come after mincha time? What happens if they come after mincha time? So remember again, we've already seen that after mincha time, essentially, we push off kiddush hachodesh. We make it a full month, right? That means Rosh Chodesh won't be until day 31. Mishachara beis hamikdash. Now remember, this is talking about Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, remember again, they were always keeping day 30 as Rosh Hashanah, because there was always the possibility that day 30 witnesses were going to show up. Always possible witnesses were going to show up, and therefore halacha lamaisa, he's not here. Halacha bris this morning is halacha lamaisa. They observed day 30 as a Yom Tiv, and therefore halacha lamaisa, they abstained from halacha already from that day. So now again, also Yom Kodesh Lamachar Kodesh. Mishachara Beis Hamikdash, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, his Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai shemekablin eidos hachodesh kalayom. So we'll say, interestingly enough, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said you could accept eidos hachodesh the entire day. Why could you accept eidos hachodesh the entire day? Why? Because there's no concern of getting messed up with Kabbalah. So we'll say, remember again, let's go back. No, sorry, I hope we're not going too quickly today. Let's say, so remember, the reason that they had to cut off Eidos HaChodesh by Mincha time was why? So that the witnesses should not get mixed up with the Shira. They should not end up saying the wrong Shira, right? It happened, right? Witnesses came after the Leviim offered the Tamid Shal Bein Arbaim. They ended up saying a weekday Shira instead of a Yom Tiv Shira. So they capped witnesses could only come until Mincha. Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. There's no carbon. If there's no carbon, there's no what? Shira. If there's no Shira, there's no confusion. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said in the aftermath of the Beis HaMikdash, you could go ahead and accept Eidos the entire day. Says the Gemara, Ma kilkulu. So the Gemara says, Kilkul avim b'shir. So we'll say, what does it mean when it says, Ma kilkul avim b'shir? What does it mean that they messed up the Shira? Hachar targimu shelo amru Shira kol ikar. So some say it means they just didn't say any Shira at all. However, the Gemara Rabbi Zera amru sha'amru Shira shel cholim tamid shal bein arbaim. No. It doesn't mean they said no Shira. Rather, it means that what? They said the weekday Shira with the afternoon tamid. Amr Rabbi Zera li Ava Berei. So Rabbi Zera said to Ava, his son, Puk tani lahu, go out and teach the following halacha. Hiskinu shelo yuhu mekablen eidos hachodesh ela kedei sheishos biyom lahakriv timidinu musafa v'niskayem v'lomar shira shelo b'shibush. They instituted that they would only accept shira, eidos, up until mincha time, in order that what? The Levium should be able to offer the Tamid Shal Bein Ha'arbayim, the Lomar Shira, and to say the right Shira without mistake. I Amrit Bishlama Emor Shira Dechol, Hanu Di Ikashibush. If you want to say that in the story in the Mishnah, they ended up saying the weekday Shira. That's the mistake. Eli Amrit Lo Amar Klal, My Shibushiga. But if you say they just didn't say Shira at all, then what mistake is there in that? Since they said nothing, right? The Most is saying no shira at all is the greatest mistake one could make. So we'll have to stop over here for today, but we're stopping mid-topic. So just understand what we're going to be focusing on tomorrow minutes from the beginning of the daf, which is, we have a story. And the story is that they were waiting on the day number 30 of Elul. They were waiting for witnesses to come to be Makadesh the Chodesh. They waited as long as they could. The Levium offered the Tamid Shal Bein Ha'arbayim, and they accompanied it with weekday shira. Right when they finished, Eidim came. It turns out that they sang the wrong shira. They were supposed to sing Yom Tov shira. They sang weekday shira. There's going to be a historical machlokes over here. Did the Eidim sing the wrong shira, or did they sing no shira? And the ramifications of that will be important for the legislation going forward as well. Shkach Bosai.